what they're looking for ended up, for me, being pretty straightforward. I was kind of surprised. So I graduated in '06, and when I went through, the big thing they were curious about were your LSAT score and your GPA. I mean, it's the numbers. Everyone at JMU is extremely active. That's one of the best things about JMU. I'm sure you guys could spew off a ton of organizations you're in and a ton of projects you work on, but they really are, I mean, that can be a tiebreaker, but you really want to focus when the time comes on your LSAT and getting your GPA as high as possible. And I'm not a super strong test taker, so I kind of knew coming into college that I wanted to go to law school, and I didn't know how my scores would be, so I definitely focused heavily on my GPA so that if one number wasn't as high as it needed to be, the other one could kind of compensate. But those were definitely the two things that were hammered home to me when I was going through the application process.
And I think it's still true. I agree. I'm class of '84, so I'm a lot older, which is sad, but fun. I mean, it's not that much different between '84 and 2006 and 2011 for law school, I can tell you. GPA is key. LSAT score is key, depending on where you want to go. But they also look at what else you're doing. I didn't go straight through. I worked for 3 years. I was a manager in a law firm and then a human resources person. And I'm a labor and employment lawyer now, so kind of interesting how it all went that way. But I couldn't go straight through for a variety of reasons. One, I was getting married right out of college, which you guys will think this is dumb, but I graduated early so I could get married. But I think if you're gonna work, it's not a bad idea. Some people like to go straight through. I couldn't, and it actually helped me to work because I treated law school as a job. I didn't get caught up in any of the drama that went into law school, because there's a lot of it. I didn't get, because I was married and had worked and didn't care about any of that stuff. So I stuck to myself. I didn't do a study group. I'm not saying you shouldn't do a study group, but at the end of the day, it didn't help me because they all asked me, what the answer was. So yeah, I got nothing out of it. So that's why I just did my own deal. But that's what law schools are looking for, I think. We're on the question of what are law schools looking for, and we were talking about GPA and some extracurriculars and LSAT. We figured you guys can chime in on that question.
Steve's a lot smarter than I am, so I definitely participated in study groups. He's probably the type of guy I went and asked questions of. There were always these guys that had the ability to develop the excellent outlines, right? So
that was usually me.
That was you? Yeah.
I was that nerd working on that outline.
Yeah.
Kind of to go from that, I remember the working is a big thing, and definitely you can gauge it by looking at certain law schools will give you the average age coming in. And I remember I interviewed with Northwestern, and the first question they asked me when I walked in, they were like, why haven't you worked yet? And I mean, they just wanted to know because they like all the people coming in to have work experience. And I don't think it's a bad idea at all. Like, I went straight through, and luckily I knew what I wanted to do. But if there's some question, it's definitely probably better to go work for a year or two so you know what you really want to do, you get in the work schedule, because it was a culture shock for me coming from JMU to going to law school where you really do need to get up, at 8, you go to your classes, you stay in the library until the night, and then you go home. It definitely is a work schedule. It's not a college schedule, and that was my biggest adjustment my first year. So working is definitely advantageous before you go in.
I very recently went through the process of this. 3.0 right now. So it depends on what school you are applying to. Northwestern was a very big on job experience. Other places don't care that at all. I remember Northwestern will accept people that are referred to as splitters, either high LSAT, low GPA people, or high GPA, low LSAT people, just based upon work experience. Now, the school I'm at, the average age is about 24 coming in, 25. So a few of them, we have a few people who are into their second careers, and a few people took a couple years off. But for the most part, it's mainly people going in just from undergrad. As I'm sure I'm just going to reiterate what you guys said, GPA, LSAT. That's what matters. There's a school, there's a website called lawschoolnumbers.com. Yeah, that will show you exactly where you'll fall in a chart of people getting in. I fell in that exact same range. I got a 160 on my LSAT, so I was a low LSAT guy. Got into wake off the wait list. So if you're waitlisted, don't feel bad first, because there's definitely an opportunity. They do it in 3 waves. and it depends upon when the deposit deadline is. The first deposit deadline is sometime in March, and that's when I got off the wait list at Wake Forest. So I was going to go to George Mason, went to Wake Forest instead. Very big difference if you haven't been to both schools and you're just looking at them from where they are on the law school rankings. I think you'll be very shocked when you see where each are located. The DC, George Mason, it's a very nice part of DC, but if you don't want a big city experience, then don't go there. Same applies to Maryland. Let's see, other than that, it's just GPL.
Going off of that, like the waitlist thing, I ended up going to William and Mary. And the one thing I would recommend, I applied to a ton of law schools, and I recommend the same, especially if they waive your fee, because especially in this environment, a lot of people are going back to numerous types of grad school programs, law school being one of them. Like, they just keep getting more applicants. To separate yourself, show up. I showed up to every school I was waitlisted at. Like, I asked for an informational interview, I asked for a tour, I just got myself in there so that they knew who I was, because I mean, like you say, you fall into this range and you're just in there with a clump of people, and if you want to stand out, that would be my one recommendation. I showed up and I got off wait lists.
That doesn't work at UNC. They don't care.
Yeah.
Wake Forest doesn't matter. Right?
But use your connections. I mean, if you've got people like the four of us, and you know that she went to William and Mary, I teach at University of Richmond. I didn't go there, but we all have connections in different pieces, and I know the dean, I knew the old dean of the university, right? He's probably still the dean. And he lived across the street from me. So you never know who can get you in to talk to people, and if you don't start using your network early, and you should do it now, ask people for advice. I mean, people like to help you. Don't think we won't. I mean, email us after this and say, I'm thinking about this, what do you think? And we'll help you. We can get you into different things, or we can at least try. Now, we may not be able to be successful, but we can at least make some calls and try. But use who you have. That's what I'm constantly trying to get my daughter to do.
I agree with that, and I'd echo that. I think a lot of folks are shy to use their contacts, and particularly not only getting to law school, but with clerkships. I mean, fewer and fewer firms are offering clerkships, and a lot of it is about relationships. And I'm always surprised at how few people do reach out and contact folks. I think they feel like it's an imposition, but I think for the most part, most lawyers, including folks that come to these sorts of things, can be very receptive to having you pick up the phone or send an email, and if we can help get you in front of folks in a law firm or with colleagues throughout the community, we'll do it. You know, the other thing, I'll piggyback on the LSAT. I took the LSAT course, like most people, and crammed through that process and then took the LSAT. I would suggest you not do that. I mean, take the course, but I would suggest you spend as much time as you can on looking at that test, becoming familiar with the test, because I think a lot of it is getting past the anxiety of taking that test, number one, and number two, just taking enough practice rounds of that test. And you know, I realize you all have busy lives, but if you can extend that over a broader period, I think your results will be better. I can't remember my score, but I know it was not very good either. And I was lucky to get into Washington at least. So, but the test is very important.
Yeah, if you just go in there blind, I took my first practice LSAT and got a 142 on it, just taking it. And a 142 is not going to get you in anyway. I took about 20 tests later, I was up to about 163, 164, and you usually score a couple points lower on the actual test day just due to anxiety. So, and you can take it more than once. I took it twice and got the same score, so I stopped trying. And it'll be fine. Whatever you get, it'll be fine. The first year law school is difficult because you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people that are just as smart as you, or you think are just as smart as you. I'm not a very intimidating guy. There's a lot of people that go in there, want to be litigators, a lot different mindset than what people at JMU have. It was very refreshing to come back on campus, and I forgot what it felt like to have someone hold the door for me on the way into a building. So I think the hardest part of 1L year is just figuring out what you're doing, and then dealing with your classmates. I was not married when I went in. I got married this past summer to my JMU sweetheart. We've been dating for 6 years, so I didn't have that kind of support system in place. But it's going to be a very rough and tumble first 3 or 4 months as you're trying to establish yourself, figure out what's going on. Especially, I had no idea what I was doing, and then I took my first set of exams, did very poorly. Took my second set of exams, and then did well. It's just one of those things where it clicks in your mind what you're supposed to be doing. You figure out, oh, well, this is the rules of the case, this is how you apply them. Don't worry about it until you get there. Really, all the people who study and do, I know some people who read through Glannon's on Civ Pro, and got a sneak peek at our case book. Don't do any of that. And all this extra stuff that your classmates are going to be doing. I remember one of my classmates spent like an hour and a half on like multiple mailbox rule hypos for contracts. It didn't even come up in the exam. He just was wasting his time. So just the professor's going to tell you what he wants, and all this the noise, just forget about it.
I kind of had a similar experience. My 1L was about 5 years ago. And I think that, I think there were a couple things that were difficult for me because I did go straight through. Time management was probably one of them. I mean, you just have to know they are going to call on you. You have to read it. It's not like, some days if I didn't get something totally read, I could just kind of sit quietly in the back of the classroom here and catch up on that stuff later. You can't do that in law school. They will call you out. If you haven't read the material, I mean, they might not give you credit for the day. Like I had some professors, if you showed up but you hadn't read it, as far as they were concerned, you weren't there. And so you actually really have to work on your time management. You apply it like a job. You really do. You sit through the day and you get through your process. And that was a big blow to me because, I'd just gotten out of college and still kind of had the college mindset. I do think when you go in, though, your exams your first year are really important. They definitely put a lot of emphasis on that because largely your first year, it is just exams. You have a set of required courses and you study throughout the semester, but your exam grade is your only grade. And, it's just, that's intimidating. They say that like law school, your first year they scare you to death, your second year they work you to death, and your third year they bore you to death. I heard that right before I started law school. It is insanely accurate. Like you are so terrified when you go in because you hear of these exams, but you can find people there. I found people there who had the professor the year before me. They'll offer you outlines. There are study guides, and it's kind of your preference whether you like them or not. Civil procedure was a jumble to me. I needed Glannon's. I had to go through there and have them walk it out for me because, it varies by the class and the professor you have, but once you get in there, just don't be nearly as scared as they make you because you waste a lot of time being afraid. But there really are people there who will help you. You'll get your time management, and there are tons of study guides, and, you'll figure out your system. You really will.
That's a good point. I forgot about that, scare you to death. That's probably true. But I think part of it, what folks have said, is treat it like a job and make sure that you have a process of how you want to go into classes. Make sure you take notes and listen very closely. Every time you have classes, take notes at the end of the year. If you can try to compile all your notes. I think if you have a process in place, that's very helpful. And recognize that everyone is in the same boat. I know when I first started, my memory with law school, at least in the beginning, was this is really difficult, and I'm not sure I can do this. And I think particularly when you start, I remember civil procedure, the first cases I read, it's the old English language, and I thought, if this is the way law school is going to be, I'm not sure I can do it. And you get past that as you get to the more recent cases. Just the volume of the reading was, to me, one of the things that was most overwhelming. And I think really through law school I became a better reader because you have to read a lot more in law school, at least my experience, than you do in undergrad. But I think recognizing that everyone's in the same boat and not to be too frightened about the process and just hang in there and you're going to be fine.
Well, the thing that I would tell you to do is, I read ahead. Most people don't. And I digested it and understood and took the time to, because when you get to class, they're not necessarily going to spoon feed you. Some professors will, but it's not like college. Your PowerPoints aren't going to control it. You can't do what my daughter says. I don't know if I'm going to buy my books or not. I can just go to the class. Well, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You know, she's 19 and she knows it all. You know, but that's how you can get away with it in undergrad. You can't get away with it in law school. You've really got to understand concepts. You have to understand how contract law works. You've got to understand how civil procedure works, even if you're not going to be a litigator. Get the outline. I mean, there are outlines you can buy. I mean, there are some good, you know, pre-made outlines. And if you need to use those, don't feel embarrassed and say, well, gee, I'm only going to stick with my contracts book and I'm not going to look at anything else. But I read ahead, and I compiled notes every week, and you're going to think this is the nerdiest thing in the world. But on Saturdays, I sat down with a word processor because we didn't have a computer. It was one of the first ones out. And I typed up my own outlines as I went. So I took the book plus my notes and compiled them into an outline that I would study so that I knew by the end of the semester I wasn't going to have to cram. Now that's probably too much work to do, but you know, I still look back at some of my stupid law school outlines on different concepts. If I've got a con law question and I don't deal with a ton of constitutional law, I'll go back and look at different things I have. And that's one thing I did. So I made it so that it was 6 days a week and I took Sundays off. And it worked. But again, you got to do what works for you. But you've got to really put the time and effort in. You're not going to get by just kind of thinking you can wing it. The other thing is you got to be good on your feet. Where I went to school in New York. I went to Brooklyn Law School because that's where we were living when my wife had a job. I wanted to go to WL, but she said, I'm not living in Lexington and there's no job for me. And so what they did is they made you stand up. And so first day of law school, I'm sitting in contracts, and the guy is Professor Hobble. He said, you know, Mr. Brown? I said, yes. He said, when I call him, you stand up. And he said, what's the rule of the case and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, the rule of the what? And they made you stand up in every class. I don't think they do that much anymore, but they want us on our feet and thinking on your feet. And so think about that. Our property class, she called on rows of people. And if your row got the question right multiple times, she got off your row. Well, we had just a dingbat on one, and she didn't want to be there. Her dad made her go to law school, so she never did the reading. Her name was Francine Galati. I can remember her like it's yesterday. And I was at the beginning of the row. We got all the way down to Francine, and Francine was snapping her gum, and she said, yeah, I don't know. Back to Mr. Brown. And it was all 2 hours. We had our whole row that was on. So it's just one of those things, one of those war stories. But first year you'll get through. You know, don't be afraid of it. Just work hard. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, sorry, I want to clarify. At the end of every semester, I make my own outlines also. It's about 5 weeks before exams start. You have to take notes every day in class. You use your computer. Everyone else is going to be using the computer. It just is faster that way. Some people like to handwrite their notes. I can't go that slowly, especially with how fast professors go and how much material they're covering. I use a Mac, and I use the program Circus Ponies. It's a note-taking program. People with PCs use OneNote. So,
Lots changed, I think.
Yeah.
We didn't have laptops in the classroom.
No.
They allow that, the laptop.
they allow laptops now. People are going to be G-chatting. People are going to be going on Facebook. People are going to be going on, the Sports Center or whatever. Don't let yourself get.
Well,
So that's
what-
why I stuck with handwriting, because I just kept the temptation away.
Yeah, I would imagine, we didn't have that, but I think that's a real temptation. I think that's a bad.
You get
thing.
fast
Yeah.
enough handwriting, you realize that pretty quickly. Because the professors also know. And even if you're trying to be a good person, focusing on your computer, if there are people on either side of you and one's checking Facebook and one's watching a YouTube video, like, you're gonna giggle. You have to just kind of be leaning over your notes. For me, it was a much more efficient system.
The constant fear of getting called on is what kept me off G-chat.
It's amazing the people that weren't scared of that.
No, yeah, exactly. It's just say, I don't know, and then go on to the next person. That wasn't me. I was terrified.
What's G-Chat?
Like Google Chat's like
Okay.
instant messenger.
I am, okay.
Yeah.
You and I.
Yeah.
I don't know what that on out of text.
In one of my classes, those first year torts, Maggie Taylor, she was just terrifying. And one person in class you could tell was G-chatting because they started laughing. Mr. His first name's Brody, I don't remember his last name. No. Brody. What's so funny? Oh, nothing, I'm not doing. Oh, really? Are you on G-chat? No, I'm not. I will deduct 1 point from your final exam for not paying attention in class. She did.
Wow.
So, don't screw around.
I was a poli-sci major, and I picked up a writing and rhetoric minor, just because everyone was like, you write a lot in law school. The way I wrote as a writing and rhetoric minor, it didn't really translate to law school. It is a different writing style. It just is what it is, and I think even just talking to friends in other professions, you have kind of a way you communicate that's just different based on your profession. But the one thing I will say is, if you get used to writing a lot, even that is just helpful. Like, I'm glad I had a writing and rhetoric minor because it got me used to writing constantly, and I mean, even just basically like practicing your grammar more regularly, like things like that, it was helpful. But the writing style is definitely different. So.
The writing style, I don't feel like we wrote an awful lot in law school. I mean, we wrote notes, obviously, and had to write memorandums, and so when you process law, you typically have a summary of the facts, what's the rule of law, and perhaps in the application of facts to law. So it's certainly not creative writing, but I think that's true that if you have, I was a political science major, public administration minor. I think, Steve, you were a political science major too. I think that was helpful to us. I think an English background, and just JMU, the liberal arts background, I think is very helpful. So I think that's perhaps how it's different.
For those of you who are bad writers, there is hope. I was an economics and finance major at JMU. I look back on, I had, for honors, GRIT, still GRIT here? Oh, yeah. Honors GRIT, I had this one professor, and I just thought she was the most unreasonable woman. My papers were great, they're fantastic. I had the same writing style throughout college. Got to law school, looked back at some of my papers, they were laughable, like laughably bad. In law school, they'll teach you how to write. It's a very simplistic writing style. They're going to say, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. That's what they're going to go with. IRAC. It's the bread and butter. You'll move away from that as you do more legal writing. But for those of you who are afraid, you think, oh, the English majors are going to be better, you'll do a whole lot of reading. And for me, reading a lot made me a better writer, just because things flow. The English language kind of flows if you get it right. If you get it wrong, you can feel it's very disjointed, and your writing's not going to make a lot of sense. So I figured out my writing from undergrad didn't make a whole lot of sense. So if you're afraid of that, what major are you?
I'm a psych major.
Psych major?
Sociology.
Sociology?
Justice Studies and Finance.
Justice Studies and Finance.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Well, there's hope for you. You'll be fine. I'll see you.
You'll be fine. And the thing that you have the advantage of that Scott and I did, but I think our younger colleagues here did, is you can go on the internet and pull down a lot of memos, legal memorandums, briefs. If you have access to Westlaw, I don't know if you do here at the university, or Lexis, you probably do in the library. I don't know. I mean, I haven't checked. But even if you don't, if you just go on Google and you Google, memorandum of law of something, you'll get a ton of stuff, and you can see how different writing styles are out there and how people write. In law school, the thing that my professor always told me, at least my writing professor as well as other professors, is I really want to see that you understood when I gave you the problem on the exam, that you could apply the facts and then apply the law to it and come up with a decision. Not necessarily just regurgitate everything that I gave you, but analyze it and then apply the law to it and then come out with a conclusion. And that's different than probably what you do, writing-wise. They'll teach you in law school how to write, but it's a little foreign. The other thing I should have told you that I didn't tell you about getting prepared is I would take some sort of law-related class here. Dr. Roberts teaches, I think he still does, administrative law and public administration, political side, poli-sci. I love to add law. I'm one of the few people that probably like administrative law. I deal with administrative law though all the time because as a labor employment lawyer, that's what I do. But I loved it. I would take some law-related classes here, and Bob's a he's a lawyer. So he's going to teach it almost like a mini law school class, and that's what he did. And there's a couple of law-related classes in the business school too. So I would take a labor and employment law class, I would take a administrative law class, I would get some sort of flavor. I was a paralegal minor here. So I was public administration, political science double major, and a paralegal minor. So I had all the basic law school classes here before I took them in law school. They weren't anywhere close to what they were in law school, but it helped me understand. So I would take something like that, and it'll help you with the writing, because Bob Roberts helped us with kind of law school related writing. So I thought that was helpful.
One other thing I'll say, kind of related to the writing, they really do guide you in law school. They kind of walk you through it. And then even where you go to work, everyone kind of, I would say everyone has a slightly different style. I wasn't sure where I wanted to go, so when I was in law school, I interned at a huge firm, a teeny tiny firm, an in-house counsel, and the government. And all of them, the one commonality they had when they wanted me to write something, they gave me a template and they said, this is how we like to have it done, work from that. So everyone has kind of a style they want when you get out into the profession, but they're not just gonna, it's too important to just say, oh, you guys figure it out. Like, I mean, someone will guide you, so you don't have to be scared of it. People will, I mean, they'll show you.
I am currently looking at the moment. I was a summer associate this past summer, which are pretty, in the old legal hiring days, it was you do your first year internship, and that will lead into a summer associateship. I mean, they don't have to be at the same firm the first summer and your second summer, but you know, the same city or something like that. That's what I did. I worked at the governor's office, the general counsel in Pennsylvania, because my parents lived in Harrisburg, and then this past summer I worked at McNeese Wallace in Newark. We had another dip in the recession, and there wasn't really enough work to go around for business counseling, which is business counseling, labor and employment, and real estate. Those are the three things I was interested in, did a whole lot of work with this summer. I was put on hold at the firm, so I'm still waiting to hear back and connecting with different people around. The best way to get a job is to network and use those connections. I called someone in Raleigh whose friends, none of my parents aren't lawyers. I'm the second person in my school to go to grad school. My sister did about 2 years. And so I don't know any lawyers. My friend in law school, his dad is friends with a guy who runs a shop in Raleigh. You just got to call these people up and say, you know, hey, I know you're a Wake alum. How you doing? My name's Chris Gibson. Can you give me some advice on how to break into the Raleigh legal market? And it's a really tight-knit legal market. I'm sure the same thing's true in Richmond. I'm sure the same thing's true in, where do you practice? Richmond. And how are you?
DC.
DC, very tight-knit in DC, a lot of government work. So you just have to network. I got my job at McNeese. I worked at a bank in college, and they did a whole lot of work with this law firm, McNeese Wallace in Harrisburg, and they remembered me from when I worked at the bank. So you never know when those things are going to come back up, when those connections you make are going to come back up.
I kind of would say the best thing is definitely the networking. Just get yourself out there. And that's another thing I will say with the working before you go. If you're not quite sure, definitely work, because law school is a great experience and being an attorney is a wonderful experience, but it is a very difficult endeavor and a very expensive endeavor. And it's no longer the case where there's that job waiting for you at the end of the tunnel. And I think even when I started in '06, my expectation was I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to get out and I'm going to have an awesome job, you know, because I was 22 and that's, you know, you're kind of in your little bubble and really excited about it, and I did want to practice law. But then I guess going into my third year was '08 and things really started to dip, and it definitely became more challenging. Like Chris was saying, the summer associateships were no longer, they used to be like just kind of, you did your summer and it was just automatic. I had a lot of friends who didn't get them, or if they got them, they were deferred, and I have friends, they were deferred indefinitely, you know. And so you just, I guess, always kind of keep networking, keep yourself out there, make as many connections as possible, because especially in the economy, it's kind of up and down. You don't know when one thing is gonna disappear and you're gonna need to do another one. For example, you guys probably know what Land America is in Richmond.
Oh, yeah, that used to be.
Used to
our
be.
clients.
Yeah, I used to be a legal intern there with in the in-house counsel with the expectation that I would stay there. And the last thing I did was, help them with due diligence because they thought someone was going to buy them out, and then I don't think anyone ever actually did. I think they just went under.
Did you work with Mike Beverly?
No, I didn't. I worked with Dave Hitchens. I was in the labor and employment.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's out in Chicago now,
I know.
actually. But exactly. So I wasn't as nearly as concerned about getting a job until I got into law school, and just things happened. But you just follow up on things, like every couple of months, email that person you talked to before. Just don't let them forget you. Just constantly be out there and remind them that you're there and you're looking and you're interested. And,
These are extraordinary times. The law firm I worked for, they've been practicing for, I think it's their 77th year as a firm. Hershey was one of their first clients. It was the second time in firm history that they put a summer associate on hold. So it's not a good time right now. When you get out, it'll probably be better than it is now.
Yeah.
So don't be too afraid. She and I were in bad.
Yeah.
You graduated in a bad year.
Yeah.
And so am I.
I mean, right when I got done, I worked in Richmond until I got my job in DC. I was just applying every day, and I took an internship with the Attorney General's office in Richmond for $9 an hour. $9 an hour will not pay off student loans or pay your rent in Richmond either. I mean, but you do what you have to do. You just kind of plug along and just make sure you're always working, you're always updating your resume, and you're just always out there meeting people. I mean, it's the best thing you can do, and you guys, I'm sure, will be fine. Like you said, extraordinary times is a really good way to describe it. No one that I've talked to who's older than us in the field has really had an experience like this where it was this bad. And when you guys get out, I'm sure it'll be fine. And I would say even in other practice areas, like even if you didn't become a lawyer, kind of for everyone, it's a bad time. So no matter what field you'd be going into, it would be an extraordinary time.
I would say be some of the same comments, but I would be persistent. And a lot about capturing your job is timing. Recognize that. Law firms don't always have a need at the time they receive your resume, but they may have a need 3 months down the road. So be persistent, maintain contact with folks, let them know you're continuing to look. Don't be discouraged. I saw a lot of folks, I remember when first applying for jobs, folks would get discouraged, send a resume out, not hear back from the organization. That's bad form, but it happens and it can be discouraging. You may apply to 1,000 places. That's not particularly uncommon, so just be persistent. Know that you're going to have to contact a lot of folks. Make sure that number two, you're networking. Identify folks that are JMU alums, folks in your community, relatives, etc. Try to field those, mind those contacts, and when you go meet with them, politely ask them, thank them for their time, maybe ask them, is there anyone else that you can direct me to? So take one contact and try to move it to another. Make sure your resume is good, not only good but perfect. We've had good candidates who have been rejected because of a typo in a resume. I know that seems like a little thing, but your resume should be your absolute best work product, and if there's an error in it, it's not going to reflect well upon you. And I've seen that more than I'd like to see, so make sure folks review your resume. Interviewing is, I think for most JMU students, interviewing is probably a little bit easier than other schools, because I think JMU students typically are pretty socially comfortable, but interviewing is a skill. Talk with folks as you go around and network, maybe for tips on interviewing. I think the best interviews I've seen are folks that show something real about themselves, maybe things that they've actually done. No one really wants to hear that you're a self-starter or that you're motivated. Those are nice things, but you really want to show a little bit about your individual personality. So just be real in your interview.
The other thing I think you've got to do really well in law school. And at the end of the day, my goal was to be in the top 15%. I was top 12%. So was fine, but I was in New York. So I knew if I was in the top 15, I would get, in the 80s, I had 10 job offers. That was late 80s, so nowhere near what it is now. And I was a summer associate in New York City. Hated it, and ended up working in Hartford, Connecticut, which was much better. But if it's helpful if you know where you want to be. Now, you're not probably going to know, but some of you might. If you want to be in Richmond or you want to be in Northern Virginia, you may want to figure out where you want to go to school. You don't have to regionally be in that school, but I can tell you, DC, Northern Virginia is going to draw pretty heavily on Mason. Not exclusively, but it helps if you're there. If you want to be in Richmond, we draw on William & Mary and University of Richmond pretty hard. W&L as well, but they're going to be a focus of those schools. If you can get into UVA, that's the place to be. I got in every school in Virginia but UVA. I got waitlisted. And my wife had the job, and so that's why we ended up in New York. She was working in New York. But I can tell you, if you get your class ranked where it should be, you're going to have a choice of where you want to go. Even in a bad market, firms are still hiring. And you got to knock it out of the park when you're an associate. When you're a summer associate, even in your first year, most law firms are going to make you do real work. I mean, our summer associate program, we actually make money on the associates because we set it up that way. So you're working on real cases, you're a real part of the team, and I'm billing you. So at the end of the day, I'm paying not only for your overhead and your salary, but I'm making a little bit of a profit on you. So you're going to work as a real associate that summer. And if you think you're going to come in and just go to lunch and dinner and have a great time, you're not going to get an offer because it's not going to work that way. So you've got to know when you go in, it's just a different atmosphere, but you'll do fine. But I agree with everybody else, use your contacts. You know, if I get a JMU resume at LeClaire Ryan, and it doesn't have if it has a typo in it, I will throw it away. I can tell you, I don't care if you went to JMU or not. If it's got a typo in it, I will not interview you. But if it's a JMU resume, it goes to the top of the pile. And if I get one from you and you're not even on the recruiting group of folks, I get you into the recruiting pool. I might get you in the door. You may not get an offer, but I'm going to push recruiting people to interview you because I can. And that's the whole point with having people that are out there. Scott, me, Chris Kelly, those are people that can get you into the door. We can't get you the job, but we can probably get you in the door and get you seen. And that's what you should use your contacts for. So, use Barry, use your honors folks. You've got a whole list of people that you can tell are alums. If you can't, find out how. There's a ton of JMU grads as lawyers all throughout Virginia, all throughout actually the Southeast. We got a pretty big network of people. So we're going to help you at least get in. You got to help yourself. And if you want us to look at your resume, shoot it to us. I mean, that's the best thing in the world. We can help you. But we're going to give you a break if we can. But you got to have to make the rest of it yourself once you kind of get to New York.
Kind of going off of some things that they said that I actually used. The job I have now, I'm an attorney for the Social Security Administration. I interviewed with them fall of '08, and I really wanted the job. I just stayed in contact with them, just borderline harassed them. And so when I passed the bar, I got the job the following 2009, but it's just hammering it home. And then another thing that was said about your resume, I've been there 2 years and I'm getting ready I want to go back on the market and kind of look around. And so I've sent my resume to numerous attorneys, and you just want the feedback. Take all the feedback you can get. I must have sent it to 5 or 6, and there are little things that are even not typos, but nuanced things. Like when you graduate law school, for example, you put on the top, because you were going to be so proud of it, pass the Virginia bar. Like, you put that on the top of your resume. Well, now 2 years later, attorneys are like, Kelly, it's implied. You passed the bar. Like, you can put that at the bottom of your resume now. Like, you want your work experience first. And it's little things like that that just don't cross your mind. And it's great to get feedback from as many people as possible. And people really are happy to give it to you. So.
You guys want to ask us anything? I mean, this is like ask whatever you want.
I know I've had a lot of trouble trying to get a good internship coming out of last year. I was applying around this time all the way up through Christmas.
In college, I was a political science major, so I worked for some of my state senators back home in Delaware. And then I did the DC abroad semester, and I worked at a lobbying firm, and then I interned at a law firm in the summer. And then once I got to law school, you're discouraged from working your first year. At William & Mary, they basically don't really let you work your first year of law school. But after that, I'm academic, but I much more prefer the hands-on learning. So like I just wanted to get in and start interning places. So whoever would take free work, I was at LeClaire Ryan. I work for Brian Muse. Like you just you just show up for a semester. You're like, hey, I have a semester. I have some spare time. Can I come in and do this? And I mean, that's what I did. Every semester, I just went somewhere else, and I was like, hey, can I come in? The Attorney General's office, hey, can I do this? Like, a lot of times, like, just keep calling people and asking. Eventually, someone will take free labor. Like, they're not going to turn it down. So.
That's good advice. I mean, I think you ought to focus on the experience and not be so worried about how much money you're going to make. You have the rest of your career to make money, so try to develop a good experience. I was a political science major. I interned before I went to law school for a member of Congress. I wasn't sure I wanted to go to law school, but in law school, the second year, I actually interned at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in the city, or in the county of Henrico. Thought maybe I wanted to be a prosecutor, so I didn't make any money, but it was a really good experience to go into the courts and see lawyers arguing cases one after the other. So I think find something that you're interested in, and Kelly, as Kelly said, be persistent.
Well, for a judge too. I mean, judges love for you to call them up if it's free. A lot of judges will take you. Federal, I mean, there's federal judges. There's a federal court that sits here. You could probably at least ask if you could get a state court or federal court clerkship. You're not going to be a law school clerk, but you can say, hey, I want to be involved in helping to write opinions. I want to be involved. I'll do whatever. And you might be surprised. The judge may say, yeah, come on, we'll do it for a semester. We don't care. Or they may say no. You know, I don't know. But if you don't ask, you're not going to know. I mean, you're in a city that at least has a federal court. I would ask. You'll see some interesting cases if you're in federal court.
And that's a good point. I mean, I wish I would have done that. The perspective from the bench, you're not going to get that unless you become a judge. So if you have that opportunity, I would encourage you to do it, because you're selling to judges as a trial lawyer, and that sort of vantage would be very helpful.
When I got in here, when I was a freshman, I did pre-law, and Dr. Jeffries was my pre-law advisor, Dean Jeffries. And the best thing I think he ever told me was just go to the best one you can get into. And especially in this job market, and it may be different, they might all have different opinions, but I mean, really go into the best one you can get into and get the best GPA you can get. Law school's expensive, in-state, out-of-state, no matter what ride you get, you're gonna come out broke. I mean, it's a fact of life. So just kind of go to the best one you can get into would be what I say. That's what he told me, and it was the best thing I could have done.
I'd echo that. You know, the law schools are ranked, whether we agree with the ranking or not. They're ranked 1 through 150. I think it's the top tier law schools. I go to the best ranked school that you can go to. I would not be focused on tuition. You're going to spend a lot of money, and you're going to think it's a whole lot of money, but it's an investment in your future. Now, I would also be cognizant of what Steve said. If you want to practice in Eastern Tennessee, you probably don't want to go to school at George Mason. Not knocking George Mason, but some schools have more of a regional focus. Northern Virginia is going to really pull heavily from George Mason. From the other Virginia schools, they may not be so focused on University of Memphis, for example. And if you want to practice in Western Tennessee, then you may want to go to the University of Memphis. So think about where you want to practice, if you know, when you think of the school.
Geography is the unknown factor. People don't think of geography because most of the advising stuff most of the advising materials focus on the top 20 law schools. Statistically, most people are not going to the top 20. So you really need to understand there's 250 law schools in the country. If you're dealing with the bottom 20, my answer is it's not worth 3 years of your life. And I've had students who only had the academic ability to get into the absolute bottom. And it's a conversation you have to have. A student with a B average and 50 percentile on the LSAT can go to law school. If you look at who actually goes to law school, even the bottom tier, very few law schools go below the 45th percentile on the LSATs. But the likelihood of getting a job, you're going to be really desperate if you're at the bottom tier, so it's worth reconsidering. But geography, I have too many students come in with the same list. Virginia schools, maybe up to Philly, New York, Boston, maybe as far south as Atlanta. thing to remember is the law schools are trying to fill boxes too. You're worried about where you're getting into. You know, if you're in Nebraska or Ohio, diversity might mean somebody from Virginia. It's not always race, ethnicity, gender. You look at North Carolina. If you want to practice law in North Carolina, I'll tell you, go to Campbell Law School. If you ever want to get a job outside North Carolina, don't go to Campbell. Campbell's a great place for North Carolina lawyers, but that's the entire market that they have. And, so yeah, if you get into a really good law school, there's really not any difference between 45 and 50, but the tiers are important. Everybody recognizes the tiers. If you can get into a top 10, top 20, of course, you go there. But small differences aren't as important, and then you've got to look at your factors. Do I want to live somewhere else? Or if I go out west, you understand you're probably going to live out west at the end of law school, and that's important. But it also has to do with, if you apply to UVA, and forgive me for my Northern Virginia bias, but I have kids walk in, I say, look, you're a rich white kid from Fairfax. That box is full on the first day of applications. Okay. They really don't need any more like you, and if you're 21 years old, 22, all you are is your GPA and your LSAT. You really don't have the kind of bank of experience that somebody who may be 35 and has a half of a career behind them. So you really do focus going in on your GPA and LSAT, depending what year you are. What year is everybody here? Junior? Okay. Sophomore? If it's a sophomore, don't worry about the LSAT. GPA is the only thing you need to worry about right now. And then you transition. And as far as I'm concerned, when the LSAT comes up, it's your full-time job for 2 months before you go. Because it's 1/3 to 1/2 of what gets you into law school. Okay, how much time do you put in getting your GPA? People focus on the GPA. As far as I'm concerned, that's only half of what goes on your scale. So when you're looking at, say you're taking the June LSAT, as soon as you turn in your last final exam in May, all you do is plan prep for the LSAT. And that doesn't mean you have to spend $1,300 on a prep course. You at least ought to be buying the books and the CD-ROMs and simply work the discipline, because that's your other ticket. And I assume everybody's seen the matrix models that are on the websites. You can look up any law school in the country and find out what their middle 50th percentile looks like, if we've talked about that with LSAT and GPA. And that tells you where you fit. I mean, the fit thing goes well. I have students with a B average say, I want to go to Georgetown. My response is, did your father buy a building? You're not going to get, unless you have some magical component, you're not likely to get, statistically. I don't tell people yes or no because there's always outliers, but I show them the numbers, and that should give you a sense. And applying, and the advice that you got in high school is also the same. You should have some good schools that you're likely to be competitive for, reach schools and safe schools. Given, you do the same sort of logic, but geography matters because half of all lawyers went to college or law school in the state where they practice. That's your geography statistic. So you know that's where I might end up in the long run.
Well, I knew that I wanted to try cases. And I knew my choices were limited based on my wife's job. So she said, you've got to apply to the New York schools, which I fought. I didn't want to go to school in New York. And I applied to St. John's and Brooklyn Law School. Brooklyn is known for churning out litigators and judges. That's why I went to Brooklyn. Because I knew I'd try cases. I tried cases my second year. Under the second year practice rule up there, I tried Social Security disability cases to federal court. Because I wanted to do it. So I knew what I needed to do, and I knew what I needed, what niche I needed. St. John's in New York is a New York bar school only. That's what they crank out. You pass the bar if you go to St. John's. And that's what they sell. So you've got to know kind of where you want to be. I know if I went to school in New York, I could work again in Virginia or wherever. I'm licensed in Florida, Virginia, and Connecticut. I practice in all 3 states now. So I'm up and down 95. That's what I always tell people. That's my career, is I'm up and down 95 depending on where it is on the coast. And so that's what I picked. So I knew kind of what I wanted to do. A lot of people will pick, if you want to be in Virginia, will go to University of Richmond. Most of their top 20 folks transfer to UVA every year. It's strange, but over there they'll get a lot of people that go to UR first, go to UVA second and third year, and graduate from UVA. And a lot of them do it. You can't go wrong if you want to be in Virginia with one of the Virginia schools. You just can't.
Except Appalachian.
Yeah, except that and Liberty. I mean, those two you can go wrong with. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but if you go to Mason or W&L, William and Mary or UR, you're fine. UVA, obviously. I should throw UVA in there because they're number one, but you're fine. But yeah, you don't want to be at Liberty or Appalachian. You're in that bottom tier that it's going to be tough for you to get a job. But I go to the best school that you can get into. Absolutely. But if you know where you want to be and what you want to do, you can kind of slot that way too.
Going kind of off of that, you had mentioned the tuition, that kind of stuff. When you get, once you get to the region and you have the schools you get into, that's when you can kind of more play with that stuff. Like for me, it was like W&L or William and Mary. Like I'm in Virginia at this point. I know I'm staying in Virginia. Well, they're around the same region ranking wise. And then it came down to, well, I can get Virginia residency, and suddenly William and Mary is an in-state tuition school. So when you get, but you will cross so many bridges before you get to that point. I didn't mean to be like, no, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's all going to be expensive, but you do factor it in. I would just say, factor that in much later, because at the end of the day, you end up at relatively the same point.
Okay.
Sometimes, this is where you do play the ranking games. Sometimes a lower ranked school will offer more money to get a better student.
Yeah.
And the unknown factors in the top 2 or 3 law schools in the country, the first level of people that are rejected have the exact same qualifications as the people that are accepted. They are so overwhelmed by qualified people. On the other hand, you may look extremely well qualified to a slightly lower ranked school, therefore they may be willing to provide money. So that's one of the reasons why if you're accepted in several tiers, money may be a factor in terms of your ability to negotiate with schools.
Shocking that the exact same thing happened to me. George Mason offered me a half tuition scholarship and Wake gave me nothing. But I didn't want to be in the city, so I mean, they're like exactly the same ranked, but it's different loads, people going in.
Well, we got to wrap this